What happens when one of comedy's biggest legends walks into what should have been a friendly morning show interview, only to find himself under attack from a host with a clear agenda? The tension was thick from the moment Eddie Murphy stepped onto the View set. But absolutely no one could have predicted the explosive confrontation that was about to unfold between him and Joy Behar. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This was a perfect example of how fast things can spiral out of control when respect disappears. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you'll definitely want to discuss this one with fellow viewers. Eddie Murphy had been making the usual media rounds promoting his latest project, and The View was supposed to be just another routine stop on his press tour. He walked onto the set wearing his trademark smile, greeting the panel with the kind of warmth and professionalism you'd expect from someone who's spent over 4 decades in the entertainment industry. Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and the other co-hosts welcomed him with genuine enthusiasm, clearly excited to host such an iconic figure. "Eddie, it's so great to have you here," Whoopi said as he settled into the guest chair. "We've been looking forward to this conversation all week." "Thanks for having me." "It's always a pleasure," Eddie replied, his voice carrying that familiar, easy confidence that has made him beloved by millions of fans around the world. The interview began smoothly. Eddie spoke about his new project with passion and humor, entertaining the hosts and audience with behind-the-scenes stories that kept everyone laughing. His natural charisma was on full display as he talked about working with the cast and crew, sharing anecdotes that highlighted both his comedic timing and his genuine appreciation for the collaborative nature of film. After all these years in the business, I still get excited about new projects," Eddie said, his eyes lighting up. "There's something magical about bringing characters to life and hopefully making people laugh, or think or feel something they didn't expect." Sarah Haynes nodded enthusiastically. "That passion really comes through in your work. You've managed to stay relevant across so many generations of fans. I think that's because real comedy is universal," Eddie responded. "People need to laugh, especially in times like these. If I can offer a little escape or a moment of joy, then I'm doing my job right." But then Joy Behar, who had been unusually quiet throughout the opening portion of the interview, suddenly leaned forward with an expression that suggested she had been waiting for this moment. "Speaking of comedy," Joy interrupted, her tone noticeably shifting from the warm atmosphere that had been established. "Don't you think some of your earlier material might be considered problematic by today's standards?" The shift in energy was immediate and unmistakable. Eddie's smile faded slightly as he processed the sudden change in direction. The other hosts exchanged glances, clearly sensing that Joy was steering the interview into risky territory. "I'm sorry, what do you mean exactly?" Eddie asked, maintaining his composure but clearly caught off guard by the aggressive shift in tone. Joy pressed on, seemingly enjoying the discomfort she had created. "Well, there are jokes in your old stand-up routines that some people might find offensive. Don't you think you owe your fans an apology for that kind of content?" "Joy," Whoopi interjected gently, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Maybe we should focus on Eddie's current work." But Joy wasn't backing down. If anything, Whoopi's attempt to intervene only seemed to push her further. "No, I think this is important to address. In this climate of accountability, shouldn't public figures take responsibility for their past mistakes?" Eddie straightened in his chair, his expression firming as he realized this wasn't going to remain a friendly promotional interview. "Mistakes? Hold on a minute, Joy. Let's be very clear about something. I've been doing comedy for over 40 years, and I've always pushed boundaries. That's what comedians do. But at whose expense?" Joy shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Some of those boundaries you pushed hurt people. Comedy has always been about examining society, including its flaws and contradictions, Eddie replied. His voice steady but edged with growing irritation. If we start censoring art retroactively based on evolving social standards, where does that end? Joy leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk, clearly feeling like she had Eddie on the defensive. So, you're saying you have no regrets about any of your past material? I'm saying that I'm proud of my body of work, Eddie responded firmly. I've grown as a person and as a performer over the decades, just like everyone else. But I'm not going to sit here and apologize for making people laugh or for being part of comedy history. The tension in the studio became unmistakable. Audience members shifted uneasily in their seats, and the other hosts struggled with how to handle the increasingly hostile dynamic Joy had created. That's a very convenient way to avoid accountability, Joy said with barely concealed contempt. Eddie's jaw tightened. Convenient? You think it's convenient to be ambushed on what was supposed to be a friendly interview to promote my work? You think it's convenient to have my entire career reduced to whatever talking points you prepared before I even walked in here? I'm just asking the questions that need to be asked, Joy replied defensively. Though her tone suggested she was enjoying the extravagant confrontation far more than someone genuinely interested in accountability would. No. You're not asking questions, Eddie said, his voice rising for the first time. You're making accusations and demanding apologies for comedy that was created in a different era. Do you apply this same standard to every comedian who's ever pushed boundaries, or just the one sitting in front of you right now? The other hosts were now visibly uncomfortable, with Sarah Haynes attempting to step in with a calming comment, but Eddie wasn't finished. Let me ask you something, Joy, he continued, turning to face her directly. Have you ever said anything in your career that someone might find offensive? Have you ever made a joke that might not age well? Because if we're going to play this game of retroactive judgment, I think it should apply to everyone, don't you? Joy's face flushed red at Eddie's direct challenge, clearly not expecting him to turn the tables on her so effectively. The smugness that had radiated from her moments earlier was quickly replaced by defensive anger. That's completely different, Joy stammered, visibly flustered by having her own standards applied to herself. I've never made the kind of material that you have. Really? Eddie replied, raising an eyebrow with a skeptical expression that made it clear he wasn't buying her deflection for a second. So you've never made a joke about anyone's appearance, their background, their beliefs. You've never said anything that might hurt someone's feelings or make them uncomfortable. Whoopi tried once again to intervene, sensing that the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. Maybe we should take a step back here and remember that we're all on the same team. But Eddie was just getting started, and Joy's attempt to hold him to standards she clearly didn't apply to herself had struck a nerve. No, Whoopi. I think this is exactly the conversation we need to have. Because what's happening right now is a perfect example of the double standards that are destroying honest dialogue in this country. Double standards. Joy scoffed, her voice dripping with indignation. I think you're being a little dramatic here, Eddie. Dramatic? Eddie laughed, but there was no humor in it. Joy, you literally ambushed me on live television, demanding that I apologize for my entire career. And you think I'm being dramatic for pointing out the hypocrisy. The audience was now completely silent, riveted by the unprecedented confrontation unfolding before them. This wasn't the usual controlled chaos of daytime television. This was raw, unfiltered conflict between two strong personalities with completely different worldviews. I wasn't ambushing you, Joy protested, though her defensive tone suggested she knew exactly what she had been doing. I was asking legitimate questions about accountability and entertainment. Legitimate questions, Eddie repeated, his voice rising again as his famous composure finally began to crack under the pressure of Joy's relentless attacks. You came into this interview with a predetermined agenda to make me look bad. And now you're trying to gaslight me into thinking this is some kind of journalistic pursuit of truth. Sarah Haynes made another attempt to restore some sense of civility to the discussion. I think what we're all trying to get at here is how artists can grow and evolve while still honoring their past work. Thank you, Sarah, Eddie said, briefly softening his tone toward the one host who seemed genuinely interested in a productive conversation. That's exactly what real growth looks like. It's not about erasing the past or pretending it never happened. It's about learning from experience and continuing to create from a place of authenticity. But Joy wasn't ready to abandon her attack. Authenticity doesn't excuse harm, Eddie. Words have consequences. And public figures need to acknowledge when their words have caused pain. And there it is, Eddie said, his voice now filled with a mix of frustration and disappointment. The assumption that comedy by its very nature is supposed to cause harm. I just think that when you have a platform as big as yours, you have a responsibility to use it thoughtfully. That remark proved to be the final straw for Eddie, who had clearly reached his breaking point with Joy's sanctimonious lecturing. A responsibility to who? Joy? To you. To whatever committee decides what's acceptable this week, or to the millions of fans who have supported my work for 4 decades. To society, Joy replied pompously, apparently oblivious to how condescending she sounded. Society. Eddie's voice was now full of incredulous anger. You think you speak for society? You think your personal opinion about what's appropriate somehow represents the views of hundreds of millions of people? I think I speak for people who believe in basic human decency, Joy said, doubling down on her self-righteous position. Basic human decency. Eddie repeated, his voice growing louder with each word. Is it basic human decency to ambush a guest on your show? Is it basic human decency to attack someone's life's work without any context or nuance? Is it basic human decency to demand apologies for art that was created decades ago, under completely different cultural circumstances? Joy's face was now bright red, and her voice shook with anger as she realized her attempt to put Eddie in his place had completely backfired. I don't have to sit here and be lectured by someone who built their career on offensive material. And I don't have to sit here and be attacked by someone who clearly invited me on this show under false pretenses, Eddie fired back immediately. Did you think I was just going to sit quietly while you tried to tear down everything I've worked for? Did you think I was going to smile and nod while you reduced my entire career to your personal grievances? The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point, with the other hosts looking increasingly panicked about how to salvage what had become a complete disaster. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing a level of conflict that was unprecedented in the usually controlled environment of daytime television. This is exactly the kind of aggressive behavior I was talking about, Joy said, desperately trying to regain some moral high ground in the conversation. Aggressive behavior. Eddie laughed bitterly. Joy, you've spent the last 10 minutes attacking me, my work, and my character, and you want to call me aggressive for defending myself? This is unbelievable. Whoopi made one final attempt to restore order to the chaos the interview had become. Okay, I think we all need to take a breath here and remember that we're having a conversation about important issues. But Eddie was no longer interested in diplomatic solutions to what had clearly become a personal attack disguised as social commentary. The gloves were officially off, and Joy Behar was about to discover that she had picked the wrong person to try to humiliate on live television. Eddie stood up from his chair, his movements deliberate and controlled, but his eyes blazing with an intensity that made everyone in the studio freeze. The atmosphere shifted from uncomfortable tension to genuine alarm as one of Hollywood's most respected figures reached his absolute limit. You know what, Joy, Eddie said, his voice now dangerously quiet in a way that somehow felt more threatening than all the shouting that had come before. I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've dealt with critics, haters, and people who wanted to tear me down. But I have never, and I mean never, encountered someone with the sheer audacity to invite me onto their show just to ambush me with this kind of self-righteous garbage. Joy shifted uncomfortably in her seat, finally beginning to realize that she might have pushed too far. Eddie, I think you're overreacting to some simple questions. Simple questions. Eddie's voice exploded with fury, causing several people in the studio to visibly jump. Simple questions. You call attacking my entire life's work simple questions. You call demanding that I apologize for making people laugh simple questions. Lady, you wouldn't know a simple question if it walked up and introduced itself to you personally. The producers were now frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, clearly desperate to find a way to cut to commercial. But the confrontation was unfolding too fast and too intensely for anyone to intervene effectively. I was trying to have a meaningful conversation about accountability. Joy said weakly. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated in the face of Eddie's unleashed anger. Meaningful conversation. Eddie laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound with none of his usual warmth. Joy, you wouldn't recognize a meaningful conversation if it came with subtitles and a user manual. What you were trying to do was score cheap political points by attacking someone you thought would just sit there and take it. Whoopi was now standing as well, clearly recognizing that the situation had moved far beyond anything that could be managed through normal hosting techniques. Eddie, maybe we should all just calm down for a minute. No, Whoopi, Eddie said, turning to address her directly while still radiating fury. I'm not calming down. I'm tired of calming down. I'm tired of pretending that this kind of behavior is acceptable. I'm tired of watching people like Joy turn every conversation into an opportunity to lecture and shame and virtue signal instead of actually engaging with ideas. He turned back to Joy, who now looked genuinely frightened by the intensity of his response. You want to talk about harm, Joy? Let's talk about the harm you've caused with this little stunt of yours. You've taken what should have been a positive conversation about creativity and art and turned it into a toxic attack session. You've shown millions of viewers that genuine dialogue is impossible when one person comes in with a predetermined agenda to destroy the other person. I never tried to destroy you, Joy protested, though her voice lacked any conviction. Really? Eddie's voice dripped with sarcasm. So what would you call what just happened here? What would you call spending 15 minutes attacking my character, my work, and my integrity? What would you call demanding apologies for comedy that brought joy to millions of people? If that's not an attempted destruction? No miscommunication, Sarah, Eddie said, his tone softening slightly when addressing her but remaining razor-sharp as he looked back at Joy. This was a deliberate and calculated attack. Joy knew exactly what she was doing when she prepared those questions. She knew exactly the reaction she was trying to provoke. The only mistake she made was thinking I would just sit there and let her get away with it. Joy made one last attempt to regain some control over the situation she had created. I think you're being paranoid, Eddie. Not everything is a conspiracy against you. That was the absolute worst thing she could have said. Eddie's eyes widened with a level of fury that seemed to surprise even himself. Paranoid. He roared, his voice filling the entire studio. Paranoid Joy. You just spent 20 minutes systematically attacking everything I've built in my career, and you want to call me paranoid for noticing? You think gaslighting me is going to work here? You think I'm going to doubt my own reality because you say so? The audience was completely silent, locked in by the raw emotion pouring out of one of their beloved entertainers. This wasn't just a celebrity having a bad moment. This was a master craftsman defending his life's work against someone who had clearly underestimated both his intelligence and his backbone. This is exactly the problem with people like you. Joy, Eddie continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of decades in an industry that had tried to tear him down countless times. You think you can say whatever you want, attack whoever you want. And when people respond with justified anger, you just dismiss them as overreacting or paranoid or dramatic. Well, that game doesn't work on me. Joy sat in stunned silence, clearly unsure how to respond to the verbal storm unleashed by her attempt at gotcha journalism. You know what the real tragedy is here, Joy? Eddie said, his voice lowering in volume but losing none of its intensity. You had the chance to have a real conversation with someone who has spent 4 decades learning about comedy, about entertainment, about connecting with audiences. You could have asked about the creative process, about how humor evolves, about the responsibility that comes with making people laugh. Instead, you chose to turn this into a political attack because that's apparently the only way. You know how to engage with the world? He paused, then looked directly into the camera before delivering his final blow. And that, more than any joke I've ever told, is truly offensive. The studio remained in complete silence for several long seconds as the weight of Eddie's words settled over everyone. Finally, Whoopi cleared her throat and tried to restore some sense of normalcy. Well, this has certainly been an intense conversation, she said. Though her voice revealed how shaken she was, Eddie looked around the studio one last time, his anger finally cooling, though his disappointment was still clear. It didn't have to be Whoopi. It really didn't have to be. With that, he walked off the set, leaving behind a stunned audience, a group of shell-shocked hosts and one thoroughly humiliated Joy Behar, who had just learned the hard way that some people refuse to be victims of ambush. Journalism. If you enjoyed this breakdown of what happens when someone tries to take down legend and gets destroyed in the process, make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. What do you think Joy Behar was really trying to accomplish with this attack on Eddie Murphy?